Well, Miss London, why did Danny Rowling send you 2 locks of hair?
Why not? It's legal, and everyone else does it. Why not me? In other words, if you're going to single me out, and the state presumes to single me out, the state presumes to recite some sort of reason that it's okay to single me out and to deprive me of my First Amendment rights and take my money. If they are not going to do this to every other journalist, why then they are discriminating against me.
And there are constitutional arguments to be made. One is that we believe that the statute itself is clearly pursuant to the Simon & Schuster opinion out of New York. The United States Supreme Court has spoken to this statute and has held it unconstitutional. So we believe it's unconstitutional on its face, and the appellate court will find it so. But what Ms. London is talking about is even more, it's being unconstitutionally applied. And I heard right before we came on some comments about the heinous nature of these crimes, and we agree with that. These crimes were horrible, and that's why it's easy to make a sweeping decision like was rendered in this case. However, sometimes emotional decisions make for very bad law, and certainly I believe that's what the potential is in this case. Again, Ms. London is a journalist who has written books in the true crime genre before. She's done it after, and she's no different than any other journalist. If it's illegal for her to do so, it's not legal for anyone to do so.
But the judge in her ruling, in Judge Lott's ruling of December 31st, said that this law was designed to encompass just this situation, and she did not draw a distinction between the journalist Sondra London and Sondra London, the friend and confidant of Danny Rowling, did she?
That's exactly why it's being appealed,
Exactly,
Clara.
that's the problem.
That's why it's a very bad decision, and it will be appealed, and it will be rectified at a higher level. I'm just hoping it'll go all the way to the United States Supreme Court so that we'll settle it on constitutional grounds and not find any of the many, many other errors that have occurred during this case, that it will be reversed. I hope it is reversed on constitutional grounds so that we won't have to go through this again with the next case and the next case and the next case. I already have cases in the works.
Well, and Ms. London, Danny Rowling is not the only person on death row that you've been involved with as a journalist or as a confidant. Have you encountered this sort of situation, this sort of attack from the state on the proceeds on any other case?
Not yet, Clara, but I'm very wary that with this decision in place, that the state might contemplate piling on further actions between now and the time it is reversed.
You know, very often victims, and certainly we're not here to beat up on any victims. Victims are victims and they deserve respect. But very often victims sell their accounts of the crime to books and to publishers, and according to this judgment could be applied to them. And that's the problem. Free speech is free speech. It's the same for a journalist as it is for a victim. And the state of Florida, the legislature has not carved out an exception saying except for people who happen to have a relationship with the murderer. That's not contemplated in the law, and it does not carve out an exception that is applicable in this case.
And certainly, Claire, I'd also like to add that that's not hypothetical. The victims' families of the Gainesville murders have all accepted thousands of dollars for the option rights to the story of this crime.
Which is their right.
Would you not draw a distinction between, though, writing a book about Danny Rowling's killings and how he went about killing these people and the victims' right to sell their stories as victims? Is there not a distinction in your mind?
No. Why
What is
should
the
there be?
distinction you're attempting to draw? I'm not clear on your question. I don't even hear distinction in your question.
Well, I could see an argument that the perpetrator of a crime created that situation and would be profiting from his own bad acts, as opposed to someone whose daughter was killed who had nothing to do with the crime, not profiting from his own bad acts, but trying to sell the story and profit, in effect, from something bad that simply happened to him, but not that he committed.
You're exactly right, and nobody in the world has ever alleged that Sondra London perpetrated these crimes. That's the point. She is a journalist that wrote a book about a crime, just like hundreds and hundreds of books that are written in this state and in this country every year. She has been convicted of nothing. She has committed no crime, just like those victims have been convicted, those victims' families have been convicted of nothing and certainly have the right to sell their stories. Not only is Ms. London not selling her story, she's writing a book. she's got intellectual property rights here, which is a concept that's very, very dear to the Constitution of this country. It's very, very heavily protected. And just because that about which she writes happens to be a heinous crime does not take it out from under the cloak of constitutional protection.
Let me ask you this. At one point, Danny Rolling's brother was entitled to some of the profits from this, and that situation has changed. But do you think that might be a distinction between this case and other cases involving journalists?
I don't think that that's even been raised by the state or the Attorney General. I think it's a non-issue in this case. I'd just like to point out, Clara, that any attempt of the Attorney General and the state in this case to separate me as a special case, in other words, to identify some hypothetical factor that will allow them to deprive me of my rights, and to separate that from the whole body of rights that are that I'm entitled to as a citizen, nevertheless a journalist, even a citizen, I'm entitled to these rights. And what needs to be pointed out here is that I'm not just Sondra London, and I'm not just someone who has, in the past, had a close personal relationship with a felon. I am a journalist, and as such I represent all journalists. And Danny Rolling is not just the guy who committed these heinous crimes about which everyone was so outraged, and there was a great deal of emotion. He is every convicted felon, rightfully or wrongfully. And there are convicted felons who are convicted wrongfully. And if this is allowed to stand, the precedent it sets would bar them, the innocent convicted felon, from having any kind of access to a journalist who would publish their story as well.